Peter Welch and Pam Bondi walked into the same hearing room, but they weren't having the same conversation. From the very first exchange, it became clear this wasn't just a policy debate or a routine oversight moment. It was a collision between a senator trying to talk about real people's lives and an attorney general who seemed determined to dodge, redirect, and reframe every question that threatened her narrative. And what followed wasn't just tense.
Things that you mentioned, and I agree with this, that it's really tough on the various federal workforce, including our law enforcement folks, who are not getting paid because of the shutdown. Mm-hmm. I agree with that. But I also think that wasn't the whole story. There is an issue here that's going to affect Americans, whether they voted for President Trump or voted for Vice President Harris, and that is the loss of health care, where on November 1st, everyone who is getting Affordable Care Act help to buy insurance is going to get the notice of premium increases. And I got a letter just today from a Vermont family, nuclear family of 5, husband and wife, 54 and 55, with 3 kids, one of whom has acute myeloid leukemia. And the apprehension that they have is that if we don't solve this problem, and November 1 is a urgent date, then their family premiums will triple. It'll be beyond their ability to pay. So I'm assuming that with respect to the threat to health care for families in your state of Florida, in my state of Vermont, you would share that concern and hope that we would resolve that.
Senator Welch, I would be happy to speak with that family too, because there are many nonprofits that help with children with terminal illnesses, and I'm involved in some in Florida. So we would be happy to talk to you about that. As to health care, the government is shut down. It's my understanding, maybe you're not one of them, but because many Democrats want health care for illegal aliens, and that's what shut down the government.
Let me
that's
be clear.
That's one of the sticking points, and I don't know if you voted
all right, well,
for that or not.
This actually is important to all of us, and the lament I have is that if this health care goes away, this premium support, it is really going to hurt families in red states and blue states. And in Vermont, I mean, we voted Democratic, but we have a lot of good folks who voted for President Trump, and their health care is jeopardized. And there's a November 1 deadline that is coming up. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think it's important for us to try to work out together a resolution that's going to be beneficial to people you care about in Florida and voted for President Trump, and people I care about in Vermont who voted in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate, and that's why I'd encourage the president to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress. Another topic, with the respective voting rights in the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont, and it's a demand to get all the information on the voting file. And in that letter, in the announcement of that letter, the chief indicated an apprehension about the voting process being taken over by, quote, the left. Now, do you have any information with respect to Vermont about a takeover of the voting process by, quote, the left?
Senator, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. We are currently involved in voter roll lawsuits in 6 states. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there's a letter that went out demanding that states, including Vermont, provide all the voting file information,
right.
Includes personal information. But when that letter was sent out—
That's perfectly legal.
But there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left?
We must have fair and free elections.
No, I know that, but I'm asking for the specific basis.
And we will have fair and free elections in this country.
Okay,
Senator, I'd be happy to talk to my chief. Who was it who said that?
It was your chief, which I assume you would know who that is. Here's the question here, okay? There is a point of view that is in dispute here about the fairness of elections. But you have the power as the as the Attorney General to use the authority of your office to make demands on states, and you did that with Vermont. That's within your right to do it. I'm not disputing your legal authority to do it.
Is Vermont disputing turning over the information to our office?
Vermont is. The Secretary of State is. And you can resolve that with her.
And we have every right to have that information,
yeah, here's
Senator.
where I'm going.
Why wouldn't they want to turn it over?
You're a prosecutor with the awesome authority to make the decision that you're going to start an investigation against the state or against an individual. And I know from your experience as a county prosecutor and as the Attorney General in Florida, you took seriously that obligation to have a factual basis before you'd proceed, right?
Senator, I take that role, I take my oath very seriously.
All right, so what I'm
and I
asking,
take fair and free elections in this country very seriously. And that information, our office is entitled to have that information. And we are involved in litigation on that, and I assume we'll be involved in litigation with Vermont.
We have a Republican governor in Vermont. We had our former Republican governor was secretary, was the treasurer for many years, and also the Secretary of State with election responsibility. What I'm asking is, do you or does your head of this voting section have any factual basis that you can point to that justifies your demand that Vermont turn over all this confidential voting rights information?
Well, it would remain confidential with my office, and you just said that you have a Republican governor, so it doesn't make sense what you just said. We've asked that of every state, Senator.
Right, and I'm asking about Vermont and what the factual basis is, but we can move on. You've mentioned that you can't discuss pending litigation, and I think the committee by and large accepted that answer. But I did notice that you spoke at great length about pending litigation, specifically with respect to the questions Senator Cruz asked you about the sentencing of the Kavanaugh defendant. That's pending, right?
He was sentenced to 8 years.
I understand that, but that's on appeal, right?
We will be appealing.
Right, so that makes it pending litigation. So you made an exception with respect to the Cruz questions.
Hold on. No,
but you didn't answer any of the questions that you said were pending litigation from any of my colleagues.
Those were facts that came out at the sentencing hearing. You're welcome to see the transcript of the sentencing hearing
I understand
with all the
that.
gruesome details of what they threatened to do to Justice Kavanaugh and other justices.
I condemn what that person did.
That was the sentencing.
But the point here is that that's pending litigation. You indicated you're going to be appealing. It's your right to do that. And you would not, you use that justification to not answer many other questions.
Justification? You're an attorney, Senator.
Okay.
You realize that.
I do want to go back to Homan. You know, there's a tape, right, with Mr. Homan? I mean, first of all, is there a tape that has audio and video of the transfer of the $50,000?
It was revealing, because when someone in power refuses to answer even the simplest questions, the silence tells you more than any prepared statement ever could. Welch began with something no one in the room could dismiss, a letter from a Vermont family facing a crisis that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with survival. A mother and father in their mid-50s, raising 3 kids, one of them battling acute leukemia, staring down a November 1st deadline that could triple their health insurance premiums. Not because of some mistake they made, not because of some change in their circumstances, but because federal support was about to vanish while D.C. was frozen in a shutdown. Welch didn't read the letter for theatrics. He read it because it represented thousands of families who were about to get that same notice in red states and blue states, in small towns and big cities, regardless of who they voted for. And instead of simply acknowledging the urgency, Bondi turned it into something else entirely. She pivoted immediately to talking points, blaming Democrats for wanting health care for undocumented immigrants, reframing the entire crisis as a partisan standoff instead of the human emergency Welch was describing. He tried to bring her back to the actual issue, that millions of Americans, families she claims to care about, were about to face crushing premiums. But she wouldn't engage. Every answer turned into an accusation. Every question became an opening for a political jab, and the family at the center of Welch's story was pushed aside like an afterthought. Welch didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult her. He didn't take the bait. He simply tried again, reminding her that people in her own state were facing the same nightmare. And still, she wouldn't stay on topic. It set the tone for everything that came next. When Welch shifted to voting rights, he brought up something extremely specific. A letter sent from Bondi's own DOJ demanding that Vermont hand over comprehensive voter data, including personal information. Welch pointed out that the head of Bondi's Voting Rights Division justified this move by claiming elections were being taken over by the left. Welch didn't attack. He didn't speculate. He simply asked the most basic question imaginable: what evidence do you have? It should have been easy. Either there is evidence or there isn't. But Bondi refused to provide anything concrete. She dodged the question entirely, falling back on generalities about fair and free elections, phrases that sounded polished but said nothing. Welch tried again. He explained that Vermont's elections had been run by Republicans and Democrats alike. He noted that the governor was a Republican. The officials were bipartisan. If the DOJ was going to make a sweeping claim about a so-called takeover, surely there had to be a factual foundation. Instead of offering one, Bondi stuck to the same script, repeating that the DOJ had every right to request the data, refusing to explain why they needed it or what triggered the demand. It wasn't just evasive. It was chilling, because oversight only works when people in power feel obligated to provide answers. And in that moment, Bondi made it clear she didn't feel obligated at all. Then came the contradiction Welch couldn't ignore. Bondi had repeatedly told other senators she couldn't answer their questions because of pending litigation. She used that line again and again, shutting down entire topics. But when Senator Cruz asked her about the sentencing of a defendant involved in threats against a Supreme Court justice, she spoke at length, even though that case was also pending appeal. Welch didn't accuse her of wrongdoing. He didn't call her dishonest. He simply pointed out the inconsistency. If pending litigation stops her from answering some senators, how can she answer Cruz? Bondi's response wasn't to clarify the difference or explain her standard. Instead, she dismissed the question entirely, brushing it aside as if consistency didn't matter. And then the tension rose to a new level when Welch brought up a different issue, one involving a $50,000 transfer connected to an investigation. Welch asked a straightforward factual question. Was there audio and video of the transfer? Bondi's answer was, I don't know. Welch pressed because it didn't make sense. How could the top law enforcement officer in the country not know whether evidence existed in a case that had already sparked public controversy? Bondi responded by accusing him of calling her a liar, even though he didn't. She bristled, pivoted, and tried to redirect responsibility to another official. The bottom line was unavoidable. She didn't want to talk about it, and she couldn't explain why she didn't know something so basic. Welch remained calm, even as Bondi grew defensive. He reminded her that she had claimed the issue was resolved before her confirmation, yet the money, $50,000 in government funds, was still unaccounted for. Welch wasn't trying to score points. He wasn't trying to embarrass her. He was doing exactly what his job required, ensuring transparency, asking for facts, demanding clarity on behalf of the public. And every time he asked, she shifted the topic, sidestepped the question, or reframed the problem as someone else's responsibility. It wasn't just evasive. It was symbolic of a deeper issue, because what this hearing revealed wasn't just that one official refused to answer difficult questions. It revealed how dangerous it becomes when people in power believe they don't have to explain themselves at all. Welch was trying to talk about healthcare that determines whether families can survive financially. He was trying to talk about voting rights, a cornerstone of democracy. He was trying to talk about the standards prosecutors must uphold, standards Bondi once claimed to live by. And at every turn, she chose to answer a different question, create a different narrative, or turn the focus onto someone else. That IT wasn't that she didn't understand the questions. It's that answering them required acknowledging facts she didn't want to grapple with. And so she reached for distractions, accusing, deflecting, shifting blame. Welch wasn't fooled, and neither were the people watching. Oversight isn't about winning arguments or creating viral clips. It's about making sure the people who wield the most power can be trusted with it. And Welch showed exactly why that trust was in doubt. He kept coming back to the same fundamental principle. Evidence matters. Facts matter. Transparency matters. Not because of politics, but because millions of Americans depend on the decisions made in that room. They depend on healthcare policy that won't bankrupt them. They depend on voting systems that won't be weaponized. They depend on law enforcement that acts based on proof, not rhetoric. Welch treated these issues with the seriousness they deserve. Bondi treated them like obstacles to navigate rather than responsibilities to uphold. And that's the real takeaway from this exchange. When leaders stop seeing oversight as a duty and start seeing it as an inconvenience, the entire system starts to crack. Not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, through every unanswered question, every sidestep, every vague response meant to distract rather than inform. Welch didn't just expose Bondi's evasiveness. He exposed the cost of it. Because when the Attorney General, the person responsible for upholding justice nationwide, refuses to give straight answers, it sends a signal far beyond one hearing room that IT tells families like the one Welch described that their struggles are secondary to political talking points. It tells states like Vermont that transparency is optional. It tells agencies that accountability is flexible based on who's asking the question. And it tells every American watching that the people in power might not be treating the truth as non-negotiable anymore. Welch wasn't dramatic. He wasn't theatrical. He was steady, persistent, and focused. And his calm persistence is what made the contrast so stark. On one side of the table was a senator speaking about families, voters, and the principles of justice. On the other side was an attorney general unwilling or unable to give clear answers on any of it. That gap is what made the entire hearing so revealing. Not the shouting, not the tense moments, but the silence, the things Bondi wouldn't say, couldn't explain, or refused to clarify. And that's why this exchange matters far beyond this one hearing. It's a reminder of how fragile accountability becomes when those in power decide they're above it. Welch wasn't fighting with Bondi. He was fighting for the truth, for the people affected by these policies, and for the standards that keep government power in check. And what he uncovered, intentionally or not, is the exact reason oversight exists in the first place. That if you care about transparency, if you believe leaders should answer for their decisions, and if you want a government that treats families, voters, and justice with the seriousness they deserve, make sure you stay engaged. This hearing was more than a clash between two officials. It was a warning. And the only way to make sure warnings turn into action is by staying informed, staying vocal, and demanding better from everyone who represents you. That if you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss these deep dives into the moments shaping our country. Your engagement helps keep these conversations alive, and together, we can push for the accountability every American deserves.